I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a single plate, when he said it. "I don't want a woman walking around with a belly like that. If you're keeping it, you raise it yourself." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He said it the same way he talked about returning a product or canceling a service. Flat, final. Then he smiled, just slightly, like he was already done with the conversation. I didn't respond. I dried my hands on a towel and folded it carefully, the way I always did. What I remember most is the sound of the refrigerator humming behind me, steady and indifferent. I remember thinking that the house felt unusually clean that night. I went into the bedroom, opened the bottom drawer of my desk, and took out a thin manila folder. He didn't know I had prepared it weeks earlier. I placed it on the table between us and said calmly, "You should sign this." That was the first time he looked surprised. But that came later. Before all of that, my life was quiet, ordinary, predictable in a way that felt safe. My name is Hannah. I was 27 then. I lived in a townhouse outside Bellevue, Washington, and I had been married to Mark Ellis for just over a year. We met at work. He was my team lead at a logistics software company downtown. I handled client onboarding. He oversaw operations. He spoke clearly, gave instructions without hesitation, and always seemed to know what to do next. At the time, that steadiness felt comforting. I had never dated before him. That part of my life had always been small and private. I spent more time reading and sketching than going out, and I never felt rushed, until suddenly everyone around me was getting married. Engagement photos, baby announcements, group chats that quietly excluded me. When Mark asked me to dinner after a late deployment, I said yes without overthinking it. He ordered confidently. He paid without comment. He walked me to my car and waited until I drove off. It all felt very adult. We married a year later in a small ceremony near Lake Sammamish. Nothing extravagant, just family, a short reception, and polite speeches. People told me I was lucky. He was respected at work, organized, dependable. The day after we filed our marriage paperwork, he told me I should quit my job. Not angrily, not forcefully, just as a statement of fact. "You don't need to work anymore," he said, loosening his tie. "I can handle things." I remember standing in the hallway, still holding my laptop bag. I remember the light from the window cutting across the floor. I remember thinking it would be temporary. That marriage was about compromise. I resigned the next morning. Life settled into a pattern after that. Groceries on Mondays, laundry on Wednesdays, dinners timed to his schedule. Mark liked things a certain way: quiet mornings, pressed shirts, meals without too much seasoning. He didn't complain often, but when he did, he expected adjustment, not discussion. I told myself this was normal, that every marriage had its roles. Then one morning, I didn't get out of bed. I wasn't dramatic about it. I just felt heavy, weak. When Mark came in, he pulled the blanket back and told me I was being lazy. He said it without cruelty, the way someone points out a mistake on a spreadsheet. I got up anyway. A week later, standing alone in a pharmacy bathroom, I watched 2 lines appear on a plastic strip. I sat there longer than necessary, holding it, listening to the muted noise outside the door. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't scared yet. I thought Mark would adjust. I thought this would change things. That night, he came home late. He smelled like alcohol. When I told him, his face didn't soften. That was when the distance began. And that was before I found the receipt. After that night, the house felt different. Mark didn't say much about the pregnancy again. He didn't ask questions. He didn't follow up. In the mornings, he left earlier than usual. At night, he came home later. When he did speak, it was about small things. The trash not taken out soon enough, the floor not swept correctly, the smell of food lingering longer than he liked. I adjusted without arguing. I cooked milder meals. I cleaned more slowly, carefully, because my body felt heavier than it used to. Some days I needed to sit down halfway through folding laundry. When that happened, I timed it so he wouldn't see. Morning sickness came and went. Some days were manageable, others weren't. Mark noticed only when it inconvenienced him. One evening, I was hanging his dress shirt when I felt something stiff inside the breast pocket. At first, I assumed it was a receipt from a grocery store or a parking garage. I almost threw it away without looking. Then I saw the name printed at the top. It was a motel, not far from his office. I stood there longer than I should have, holding the paper between my fingers. The room was quiet. The air smelled faintly of detergent. I remember how carefully the receipt had been folded, as if it mattered. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I placed it back exactly where I found it and finished the laundry. That night, I didn't sleep. Once the idea entered my mind, other details rearranged themselves without effort. The forced resignation, the way he guarded his phone, the way he never spoke about the future anymore, the irritation when I mentioned doctor appointments or savings. I didn't want to believe it, but I also didn't rush to deny it. From that point on, I paid attention. Mark took his phone everywhere, even to the shower. His desk at home was spotless. No loose papers, no notes, no forgotten items. He was careful, methodical. The same traits that once impressed me now worked against me. I checked pockets when I could. Receipts appeared occasionally, but nothing useful. No names, no messages. I considered hiring someone, but I didn't have access to money without explanation. An explanation would lead to questions I wasn't ready to answer. Meanwhile, his behavior hardened. He ate foods that made me nauseous and insisted on sitting close. He criticized the way I wiped counters, then watched while I did it again. When I moved more slowly, he sighed loudly, as if patience itself were a burden. I stopped expecting kindness. I focused on observation instead. Then my father called. He rarely did. He lived most of the year in Vancouver, where his company was headquartered. When I saw his name on my phone, my first thought was that something had gone wrong. He didn't waste time. "Hannah," he said, "I need to ask you something. Are you all right where you are?" I told him I was fine. That was my habit. He didn't respond right away. "I heard some things," he said, "about your husband, about your job, about why you left." I sat down. He didn't accuse. He didn't dramatize. He told me facts, names, dates, a quiet connection at Mark's company that had raised concerns months earlier, a relationship that hadn't started recently, a reason my position had suddenly become inconvenient. I didn't interrupt him. When he finished, I thanked him. My voice sounded steady, even to me. After the call ended, I stayed seated for a long time. My hands rested on my stomach. The house was silent except for the clock in the living room. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't angry yet. I was clear. From that moment on, I stopped reacting and started planning. I stopped hoping he would change and started preparing for the version of him he had already shown me. I made lists in my head, timelines, what I needed and what I could do without, what had to be documented and what could wait. Mark didn't notice the shift. Or maybe he did, and mistook my silence for compliance. Months passed. My body changed. My patience sharpened. Then, one evening at the dinner table, he pushed his plate away and looked directly at me. And I knew the quiet part of my life was about to end. By the time I entered my 3rd trimester, I had stopped asking questions out loud. I woke up early, not because I was eager, but because the mornings were quieter. I learned when the delivery trucks passed, when the neighbors left for work, when the house felt neutral again. Silence became something I used, not something I endured. Mark, meanwhile, grew sharper. He commented on my body in passing, like it was a minor inconvenience that had shown up uninvited. He complained about money while buying himself new suits. He reminded me, casually, that everything we had was because of him. I listened. I remembered. What he didn't know was that I had begun keeping records. Nothing dramatic, just dates written down in a small notebook I kept inside an old book on the shelf. Times he didn't come home. comments he made, expenses that didn't line up. I wasn't building a case yet. I was building clarity. The first real shift happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was organizing paperwork, warranty documents, insurance forms, tax statements, things I'd been allowed to handle because they were domestic. Mark liked order, but he didn't like details. He trusted me with filing, not with decisions. While sorting, I noticed a folder I hadn't seen before. It wasn't hidden. It was just placed among older documents, like it belonged there. Inside were copies of internal transfer requests from his company. My name appeared on one of them, not as an employee, as a complication. The language was professional, neutral, but the timeline matched perfectly with when I had been encouraged to resign. The justification referenced departmental sensitivity. I closed the folder and returned it exactly where it had been. That night, I didn't mention it. I served dinner. I cleared the table. I went to bed early. Step 1, I told myself, was to stop guessing. Step 2 was to confirm what mattered legally, not emotionally. The next morning, I scheduled a consultation, not with a lawyer yet, with an administrative advisor my father had recommended years ago, someone who specialized in personal documentation and long-term planning. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I asked specific questions. What counted as marital property? What didn't? How gifts were categorized? How timing affected responsibility? I took notes. I thanked her. I left. Mark noticed I was calmer after that. He mistook it for acceptance. As my due date approached, his patience thinned. He criticized meals openly now. He stopped pretending his absences needed excuses. One night he told me I was too slow lately and that I should be grateful he tolerated it. I nodded. The second shift came the day he threw my dinner onto the floor. The plate shattered, food spread across the tiles. He stared at my stomach when he spoke, like it offended him personally. That was when he said it. About not wanting a woman like this. About raising the child alone. I didn't argue. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I walked to the bedroom, opened the drawer, and took out the folder I had prepared weeks earlier. Not in anger, in order. When I placed it on the table, his expression changed. Confusion first, then irritation. "What is this?" he asked. "Something you asked for," I said. Just not directly. He laughed once, sharp and dismissive, and told me I was being dramatic. He told me I couldn't manage on my own. He told me I should think carefully. I waited until he finished speaking. Then I slid the pen toward him. He signed faster than I expected. The next morning, while he was at work, I submitted the documents. I packed only what I needed. I left the house clean. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't feel free yet, but I felt aligned. And that was enough to move forward. The legal process moved without noise. Mark didn't contest the divorce after that call. The paperwork spoke clearly enough. Dates, signatures, filings. No room for interpretation. The court didn't ask about feelings. It asked about records. Child support was calculated using standard formulas. Income history, employment records, no negotiations, no conversations. He paid. Not because he wanted to, but because systems are patient in ways people aren't. There was one final interaction, though, not in person, not by phone, through attorneys. He requested a meeting, claimed he wanted closure, claimed there had been misunderstandings, claimed he deserved a conversation. I declined. Instead, I authorized my lawyer to send a single response. It wasn't emotional. It didn't accuse. It didn't explain. It listed facts. Date of resignation. Evidence of workplace conflict of interest. Documentation of extramarital involvement. Signed divorce agreement. Support obligations. That was the confrontation. There were no raised voices, no dramatic exchanges, no final speeches, just reality, delivered in writing, without commentary. After that, he stopped reaching out entirely. Months later, I heard through someone else that his situation had worsened. He had remarried quickly. Expenses exceeded income. His professional reputation had taken quiet damage. Nothing explosive, just erosion. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt finished. One afternoon, while organizing old documents, I shredded the remaining copies I no longer needed. I did it slowly, feeding each page into the machine, listening to the steady mechanical sound. When it was done, I emptied the bin and wiped the surface clean. That night, after putting my son to sleep, I made tea and sat by the window. The street outside was calm. A dog barked once, then went quiet. There was no victory speech waiting for me, just space. And that was enough. The resolution didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, spaced out over time, delivered through ordinary channels. Bank statements, legal notices, quiet confirmations that things were happening the way they were supposed to. Child support began arriving on the same day each month, always on time, always the exact amount ordered. I didn't comment on it. I didn't acknowledge it. I treated it like a utility bill, part of the system, not a message. My lawyer forwarded a final notice a few weeks later. Mark had attempted to dispute the amount, citing financial hardship. The request was denied. His current circumstances didn't outweigh documented income history. The ruling was brief, impersonal. That was the last official update. I never saw him again. Occasionally, information reached me indirectly. A former co-worker of his mentioned that he had taken a lower-paying role after leaving his company. Another said he seemed distracted, thinner, more tense than before. Someone else mentioned debts, nothing dramatic, just the slow narrowing of options. I didn't ask questions. At home, life moved forward at a pace set by my son. Feedings, short naps, late afternoons where the lights slanted across the living room floor and stayed there longer than I expected. My parents took turns holding him, speaking softly, as if the house itself required calm. One morning, while sorting mail, I noticed how little of it caused any reaction. Bills were predictable. Notices were neutral. Everything had a place. I realized then that the most important outcome wasn't financial or legal. It was quiet. No one questioned my movements. No one evaluated my pace. No one watched me to see if I was doing things correctly. Silence wasn't something I endured anymore. It was something I owned. When my father spoke to me about the future, he did it carefully. He didn't pressure. He didn't assume. He mentioned the company only in practical terms, training timelines, gradual involvement, options, not obligations. I listened. I asked questions. I took notes. There was time. One evening, after putting my son down, I went through a small box I had brought from my old house. It held a few personal items I hadn't needed before. A spare key, an outdated planner, a photograph from early in the marriage. I looked at it briefly, then placed it back in the box and closed the lid. Some things didn't need revisiting. That night, I cleaned the kitchen slowly, wiped the counters, set the coffee machine for the morning. The motions were familiar, but the meaning had changed. They were no longer expectations placed on me. They were choices. When I finished, I turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the house settle. Everything felt stable. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next problem to arrive. These days, my mornings start quietly. I wake up before my son, make tea, and stand by the kitchen window while the water heats. The neighborhood is still half asleep. Lights come on one by one. A delivery truck passes at the same time every morning. Predictable things have become comforting again. After breakfast, I straighten the living room, not because anyone expects it, but because I like the way order feels. I keep a simple routine. Walks in the late afternoon, phone calls with my father once a week, planning, slowly, for what comes next. I've begun preparing to work again, not out of urgency, out of readiness. My father and I talk in steps, training first, observation second, responsibility later. Nothing rushed, nothing assumed. Sometimes when people hear parts of my story, they focus on the money, or the divorce, or the timing. I don't. What mattered most was learning how quietly control can enter a life and how calmly it can be removed. There are others who don't realize yet that what they're feeling isn't confusion. It's information. When they're ready, I listen, not to intervene, just to remind them that clarity comes before change. In the evenings, after my son is asleep, I sit with a book or organize the next day. I put my phone face down. I don't wait for calls that won't come. The house feels like mine. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. If it resonated in any way, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps this space reach others who may need it. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I read those comments more than you might think. 2 more popular stories will be appearing next, and I hope one of them finds you at the right moment.